Hello, my name is Dante Renee, and welcome to the 10 Room Bizarro YouTube page where I talk about films that I believe need to be talked about more. Like tonight's film, 1986's Haunted Honeymoon. This is 1986's Haunted Honeymoon starring, we have Gene Wilder, Gilda Radner, and Dom DeLuise, as well as some awesome other cast members. This is the DVD from MGM. And this particular DVD, I know recently it got released on Blu-ray. This is the back of the DVD here. Get a great shot of them and the butler. And this is just such an this is one of my favorites here, folks. And it says in the back, a crackling spoof of terror tales. Here it is. We're going to get into this film right here, folks, from 1986. This film is actually written by Gene Wilder and directed by Gene Wilder. And yes, this is a film that people need to talk about more. So let's get into it. Great cover. Look at that cover. I do have to get this on Blu-ray as well. Here it is, folks. 1986. Oh, man. If this is an old dark house film, an homage to old dark house films, mixed with just the right touches of comedy and fun and old-time excitement. And you hear the names of Gene Wilder, Gilda Radner, and Dom DeLuise, and if you know anything about them, if you do research on them, and if you know their films, you take their styles, you take their worlds, and you bring it into, an old horror radio show, the old mystery theaters on the radio, the reading of a will. A bunch of characters coming to an old dark house at night, and trying to scare someone to death. The mysteries of a killer, a murderer, a werewolf, dead bodies, being buried alive, ghostly images, cross-dressing. Cross-dressing on a couple fronts, actually. This is Haunted Honeymoon. Now, I will say that if you know the film Old Dark House, that amazing old black and white film, Old Dark House, this film really seems to be inspired by that film in particular. But I also see, elements of a lot of those old dark house films. There's a 90s film that I absolutely love called Nothing But Trouble with Chevy Chase in it, which also gives me an old dark house vibe as well. And I think of the movie Clue, which was in the 80s, and I see some beautiful connections between Haunted Honeymoon and Clue as well, which is another one of my favorite films. So let's get into 1986's Haunted Honeymoon. First and foremost, we're going to talk about the music in this film. The music in this film the score was done by John Morris. I believe that the score CD is now out of print, but I was able to pick it up a couple years back, a limited edition release. And the interesting thing about John Morris is that he not only scored Haunted Honeymoon, but he also scored another old dark house film from the same similar period called Clue, based on the board game, which I already mentioned previously. The music in here is just absolutely perfect. It's old dark house, thunder and lightning, a bunch of people gathering for the reading of a will, a murder, a mystery, a killer in the house, late at night, secret passageways. If you were to take those elements and put them in score form, you would have John Morris's score in here. There's touches of kind of an antique quality to the score. Even though it's from 1986, it has really elements of black and white films and black and white vibes. And we also have just a spooky, creepy quality to it. We also have some pieces of music in here that are old time music, old time kind of Broadway sounding dance numbers in one dance number, just one in here with Gilda Radner and Dom DeLuise, which is just absolutely perfect. And I was able to watch this film with an 82-year-old actually, and he knew the song. He never saw this movie before, but when that song popped up, it must be a real old time song, and I had a really great learn something when watching the film with an 82-year-old, and also the there's this creepy song being played on an organ, which the 82-year-old that I was watching the film with also stated that that is like an old time song, like something "Be afraid of the big bad wolf, big bad wolf," something like that. So that's in here also, an organ, the sound of an organ, and the sounds of roaring thunder and lightning all throughout Haunted Honeymoon. Lots of horror sound effects, in the middle of the night, through the watches of the night. Um, and, Gene Wilder, people know him for his comedic genius, and of course, Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory, and maybe in the latter portions of his life, his books. The interesting thing is that people do not talk about what he did in Haunted Honeymoon. He directed this film, and I gotta tell you, it is absolutely perfect. It's there is so much style in this movie. There are shots in this film that probably took forever. That the average producer would probably say you don't need to do that. It's unnecessary. And I could just see, to have that scene, to have those scenes in this film, it took effort, it took time, it took focus, and it's perfection, even if it only cascades across our eyes for mere seconds. There's unbelievable shadow work in this film. There's great work with lighting and hallways. Those hallways where the windows are open and the curtains are blowing through. Lined hallways with candles. Um, the camera on the exterior of this mansion, this old dark house where the majority of the movie takes place. The exterior is as the camera glides over the windows, seeing the activity from window to window inside of the house, but shooting from the exterior. There's this amazing shot of this magician who's in the film. Yes, a magician, and his girlfriend or wife, and they're kind of in front of a mirror, and there's many reflections around them with mirrors, and all of a sudden they're in the same position and everything changes around them, and they're in the ballroom downstairs as the passage of time has taken place right before our very eyes. The electricity goes out in this film, and so we are left with kind of candles, big candles, carrying the candles from scene to scene. And I mentioned it earlier, and it's so ingeniously such a great mix of comedy and horror in this film. I say that Haunted Honeymoon is so interesting because for somebody who does not watch horror, they could enjoy this film and experience some horror at the same time. But for the seasoned horror lovers, this is a film that they will also love because of the strong horror elements, the spookiness, the creepiness. So, how many films do you know of that can gather up both sides of the coin here? People who aren't familiar with horror at all and don't like things too horrific, and then real horror fans. It's such a unique mix. And then the people who like comedy, of course. Just the way the comedy is done. I mean, when you watch this film and you think of Dom DeLuise and Gene Wilder and Gilda Radner, it just gave me this vibe, number one, how much fun they were having making this movie, but also like kind of that phrase, quote, the good old days. The good old days. I was watching a movie of ghosts here, and it's something that's really, really interesting is that I find myself watching more and more movies where like everybody's dead. That I'm watching these movies, and I was kind of raised, with these actors in some form or fashion. Even with Saturday Night Live with Gilda Radner, and of course, Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory, and it was interesting. It was like, to them at this time, in 1986, this was probably, just the best time of their lives, as they were making this movie. Um, it's creepy. There's a kind of a pretty wild fight scene in the movie. There's a really creepy scene dealing with the telephone wires being cut, with Gilda Radner. Pieces of this film reminded me of the movie Hell Night with Linda Blair. Just pieces. Um, Really an interesting subtext or theme in the film of facing your fears and of the power of the mind and the power of anxiety and the power of um, your childhood and childhood scars and their impact on you for the rest of your life. Um, the study of fear, the study of anxiety. Also, we have some big twists in this film near the climax of the movie. This movie is rated PG. Would it be rated PG today? Yeah, I think so. Probably maybe a light PG-13. That's a true testament when the comedy is that awesome and it's that creepy and horrific. What a mansion we have here. What great shots. What a great ending to this film. Um, we have latex masks in here. We have a werewolf. We have drunkenness. We have the mysteries of the basement and the wine cellar, and all of the different rooms of the house. A cobra snake, a man walking on the wall. Um, Hilarious kind of sexual energy from certain characters in the film. It's a mystery as well. You're trying to figure out who the murderer is. Um, and Definitely ahead of its time with cross-dressing, I would say. Now in 2017, this would not be as shocking, but definitely ahead of its time in that regard. Um, Great swipes with the editing. The scene just swiping across the screen. It's freaking awesome. Um, Haunted Honeymoon, is what this cover is right here, folks. This is a bygone error. The old Dark House films. Rob Zombie's House of a Thousand Corpses incorporates clips from the film Old Dark House, actually, and also Wolfman. And there's something about that energy and that creepiness, and it's like pure Halloween. It's pure Halloween, and this is Haunted Honeymoon, folks. Here it is, folks, from 1986, and it is my pleasure to talk about this film. Thank you so much for watching the 10 Room Bizarro YouTube page, where I talk about films that I believe need to be talked about more, like 1986's Haunted Honeymoon. Thank you so much, and good night.